Chapter 16. The black pool poured over Anne's head and pressed her down into a warm, soundless gulf. The water was warm. She had set her teeth against a stinging chill, but the water was actually warm and marvelously soothing against her unclothed flesh. It was a soft unguent, laving every bruise and long tormented muscle. Her slim body, a wavering white shadow in the black stillness, yielded to it gratefully. Mid-air, Driscoll had cried into her ear, "Don't be afraid, and hold your breath." She did hold her breath, and before they had got down so far that fear seized her, Driscoll twisted sideways to bring their plunge to a full stop. Then they drifted upwards. His arm had remained protectingly at her waist, but as they broke the surface it withdrew and she floated alone, filling her lungs with deep, quick gasps. "All right? Are you all right?" Driscoll trod water at her side and blinked his eyes free of drops which trickled down from his hair. "Yes," Anne said faintly. "I can swim. But oh, Jack, I can't believe you've really come." "I've come all right," said Driscoll reassuringly, but he looked swiftly back toward the ledge. Kong, because of his people's age-old distaste for water, had taken the slower way down. At that, he was almost to the bottom. By hand and foothold, he was dropping with a speed which would have landed any other creature on the rocks in a broken heap. "Lively it is," said Driscoll in Anne's ear. Pointing to where the water spun into the underground channel, he explained briefly what they must do. "I'm ready," said Anne, "but please keep close to me, Jack. I'll be right here." He reached out a comforting hand. Kong made a final, long leap and came down to the bottom on resilient haunches. Hands drumming, throat full of thunder, deep-set eyes ablaze, and long arms already reaching, he spraddled toward the edge of the pool. Anne gave a cry of terror. "Dive!" Driscoll cried. Anne answered by jackknifing swiftly under the water. Driscoll followed, his body taking speed from powerfully threshing legs. When Anne had to break back to the surface short of the channel's mouth, he flashed past her and emerged first, on the alert. Kong had sensed their objective, or perhaps those all but hidden eyes were sharp enough to catch their shadowy underwater flight. A roaring fury, he lumbered toward the mouth of the channel, almost near enough to stand guard, and thrust his great arms down. "Dive!" Driscoll cried once more. Blindly, Anne jackknifed again. This time, the distance was easily within her limits. Deep underwater, her white body pointed unerringly for the goal. With every movement, her few torn remnants of clothing drifted slowly alongside stroking arms and legs. She had time to be glad she had sucked her lungs full, to wish she dared look back for Driscoll, to grow cold under the shadow of a hairy, reaching paw. Then, in the same instant that Jack's hand upon her heel gave notice he was following, the suction caught her. She had presence of mind enough not to resist the current rushing her along. From somewhere, the memory came of a man in a book who had survived a fall into Canadian rapids by letting his body swing limp against every obstacle. She did likewise. Hands and arms folded about her head to protect it, she made no resistance but allowed the water to twist her as it would. There were indeed no obstructions to come against, save the lay, circling wall of the tunnel, and that had been worn smooth through the centuries. Once a knee struck painfully. But the pitch-black passage was short. Her lungs had scarcely begun to protest against their burden of old breath before she was flashing in a white smother of spray out of the side of Skull Mountain. There followed a brief drop into a churning pocket, and then she found herself sweeping along in the soft moonlight between sheer, rocky banks. "Jack!" She called loudly, her agonized fear returning with the sense of being alone. She rolled over on her back to look for Driscoll, and there he was, at her very side, with a quick hand beneath her tired head. She closed her eyes in flooding relief. Thus sightless, she felt she was moving twice as fast as before, and the current had seemed swift even when she could see. "Easy does it," Jack said at her ear. "This road takes us all the way back to the village, and we're making great time. Even if Kong follows, he has to travel overland, and it's dollars to donuts we beat him. If we don't," he ended solemnly, "he'll have to come into the water to get us, and dive deep too." Still drifting upon the supporting hand, Anne reached out to touch Driscoll in mute thankfulness. "But Jack!" she cried then. "You're hurt." "Kong," he explained, and his mouth shaped into a hard curve of triumph under a torn forehead. "He reached for me just as I shot into the tunnel." Anne put gentle, dripping fingers alongside the hanging triangle of flesh. "Well, my dear," she said, laughing to keep from crying, "I haven't got enough clothes left to dress a penny doll, let alone a grown girl of my height and weight, but I certainly owe you a bandage, and if you'll just nip ashore, I'll find you one, and let my maidenly modesty go hang." That was exactly the light note the adventure required. Driscoll grinned. He had been drifting on his back, too, in order the more easily to keep his supporting hand under her head. Now he swung on his side, caught her into his arms, and kissed her until they both disappeared under the water. Anne came up sputtering. "That was only partly because I couldn't help it," Driscoll told her. "The other part was to celebrate escaping." Anne smiled at him tremulously. She was still haunted by her night and day of terror. She knew Kong might be following, and she was so tired that she would have dropped straight down to the swift stream's rocky bottom if Driscoll's hand had not been giving its support. She was weak from hunger, too. She was only beginning to realize how famished with hunger she was, and she was aware that their flight was beset by a multitude of dangers. But she was glad to the core of her heart. With her eyes, she called Driscoll back, and when he came close, she curved an arm about his neck and kissed him lightly on the mouth. "I want to celebrate, too," she said, "and besides, I couldn't help it either." Driscoll kissed her a third time, but then he hauled away until he touched her only with that one hand beneath her head. In the moonlight, his figure made a dark shaft apart from her drifting white shadow. "Neither of us," he told her, "has so much as a lick of sense." "It's nicer to be happy than sensible any day, or night," Anne added, eyeing the full moon. "Have you," he demanded, "the faintest idea about where we are, or where we're going?" "Wherever you say. Your confidence is a compliment, all right enough, but wait until I tell you a few things." Gliding along, he explained his theory about the stream and where he believed it led. As he talked, the bank on either side drew more deeply into shadow, and the current seemed to grow a little less strong. "The minute you feel rested," he said, "I want you to swim, not hard. Just enough to help the current. I don't think we have so very far to go, but we can't waste any time." "I can swim now," Anne told him, "at least for a while." She flashed over in the moonlight and began stroking valiantly. "Take it easy," Driscoll cautioned. "Long ones and slow ones. All you have to do is help the current just a little." Beneath the murky cloak of one bank's shadow, Anne's arms and legs moved rhythmically in obedience to his order. "That's fine. If you get too tired, we can find a log along the shore, I guess. But we'd go slower with a log, and I want to make speed. God alone knows what we're likely to meet." "I can keep on for a while. We'll have to leave the water when we reach the lagoon where we found the dinosaur. No current there at all, or scarcely. We can walk around it faster than we can swim through." At the prospect of walking, Anne realized her weakness and forced herself to confess it. "I can drift along like this," she told Driscoll, "especially when you give me a hand now and then. But Jack, I couldn't walk even 100 feet fast enough to outdistance a snail. I hadn't thought you could. Honey, I'm going to carry you." "Carry after all you've been through, Jack, you never could." Driscoll stroked along for a little, then he said softly, "Don't make any mistake. I could carry you 10 miles if I had to." Or, Anne said to herself, go down trying. He hadn't, she knew, the strength to carry her. Not after his night and day of pursuit. And yet, from somewhere, she was happily sure he would find the strength when it was needed. That surging confidence in him enabled her once more to fight off terror as the captor from which she had been freed came into her mind. "Is he following, Jack?" "I've been wondering that same thing," Driscoll said in a tight, disturbed voice. "I can't believe that brute has sense enough to follow a trail he can't see, and we've certainly outdistanced him. I can't believe either that he will go back to the village just because he remembers you. He ought to want to stop to eat. He must be as hungry as we are, and in a beast hunger comes ahead of everything." "If he really is all beast," Anne said in a low tone. "If." She was silent for a moment. Then she said in a voice which she could not keep steady, "Jack, it was horrible being in his hands. You can't imagine such hands unless they have really touched you, felt you, as though trying to puzzle you out. And sometimes, from the way he looked at me, from the way he carried me carefully up in the crook of his arm instead of dragging me along, as he did at the start. I wondered. I thought. Her voice went up on a note of hysterical terror. Driscoll put out a steadying hand. "Forget about Kong," he ordered. "He's no mystery, and if you weren't so tired, you wouldn't think so." "Maybe I wouldn't," said Anne, and drew close to him under the water. They glided along, white shadow and dark shaft beneath the soft rays of the moon. The current grew steadily less rapid, and the effort to make progress increasingly hard. Once, in spite of her protests, Driscoll made Anne go to a bank and rest. A very brief rest. He had insisted, but when she obeyed, he was on edge until they got off again. "See how the banks are drawing apart," he whispered after a time. For some distance they had spoken seldom and in whispers. Apprehension was growing in them both. "We are near your lagoon," Anne hazarded. Shortly it became plain that they were. Their drifting progress became imperceptible, and Driscoll cautiously guided them both ashore. Once there, he lifted Anne's tired body in his arms. Her protests were faint. Securely cradled, she admitted her exhaustion and fell drowsily against his breast. Her eyelids slipped down as he strode away from the shore into the shadowed thickness of trees and brush. There was a deep comfort in the pressure of his arms, in the occasional grazing touch of his head upon her soft shoulder. She kept her eyes closed until he put her down. "Just resting a minute," he whispered. They were in a dense growth and in the shadow of a great tree, but even there the moonlight penetrated a little, and he shifted to put her body, so betrayingly white, out of the faint light. "All right," he whispered, and picked her up again. He rested 3 times more. When he made the 4th stop and her feet touched ground, Anne found they had come back to the stream. Its current was apparent again. The lagoon was behind them. "What was that?" Driscoll stiffened. Far to their rear, they heard a crashing in the forest. "It might be anything, of course," he said abruptly, "but let's go." Anne knew that he did not believe it might be anything. She knew that he believed that it was Kong. Horror stole upon her again. Swimming, she found that this horror gave her new strength. She was less tired, too, after her rest in Driscoll's arms, and the immersion seemed to revive Driscoll. They swam steadily. When Anne lagged, he made her put a hand on his shoulder and so carried her along. That went much better than the old program of floating. Ahead, they heard a faint liquid murmur. At the sound, Driscoll touched her exultantly. "Remember," he whispered, "I told you this water led by the chute down to the plane of the altar? That's the chute we are hearing." The murmur grew more distinct. "It's going to be tough," he whispered. "Almost as bad as the water tunnel, Anne. But we daren't delay long enough to go down by the trail along the bank." "I'm not afraid," Anne said. "Brave lady." "I'm really not, but you stay close, Jack. I'll be right there." Now they saw tumbling dark water ahead. "Easy does it," Driscoll said. Behind them, the crashing in the forest came again. It was still far behind, but they both heard it distinctly. The menace of it urged them ahead. The tumbling stream whirled about them, swept them down the water chute. It was over in a moment, but this time, in the brief descent, they both suffered. Driscoll's right arm hung down, numb and bleeding. Anne's white thigh was streaked crimson from hip to knee when they clambered out onto the shore. "Is it broken?" Anne whispered at sight of the loosely swinging arm. "Just numb, and the cut isn't anything at all. But Anne, you're hurt." "The poor girl hasn't a bandage either." Anne laughed, looking down ruefully at her virtually non-existent clothing. "But what does it matter? Look, Jack, look!" Across the black plain, beyond the dimly visible bulk of the altar, rose a long shaft of light. It required a second look to make clear what it was. Torchlight showing through the slightly opened gate. "They're waiting for us," Anne cried. "Jack, oh Jack, we're safe!" Standing still, hands clasped, they stared in relief and thanksgiving. Then stooping, Driscoll cradled her weight into his good left arm and marched toward the beckoning torches. Once, as they went through the darkness, Anne thought that she heard again a faint crashing up on the precipice, but it was very faint and she heard it only once. She put it out of her mind and rested, exhausted but at peace, against Driscoll's breast. Chapter 17. Lumpy saw them first. There had been so much talk about this big black brute called Kong that Lumpy felt a trifle jumpy. It was all wind, of course, all just so much jaw exercise. The idea of grown men holding to such a notion. But just the same, it wouldn't do any harm to ramble over to the open gate and take a look out onto the consolingly empty plain. Lumpy strolled with studied nonchalance over to the gate, and what he saw sent tingling currents through all his dry old bones. The plane was by no means empty, not by a long nautical mile. "Yo!" Lumpy howled and tacked through the gate as fast as his surprised ancient legs would take him. "It's Miss Anne and the mate." Denham cut short his confident praise of Driscoll, forgot his philosophical summation of beauties and beasts, and ran. Inglehorn swallowed a freshly cut half-inch of plug cut, but in spite of this he was the third man out into the plain of the altar. Behind swarmed a delirious, shouting train of sailors. Just in front of the altar, close enough so that the longest rays of high-held torches picked out his drenched, sagging figure, walked Driscoll. In Driscoll's arms was Anne, whose white still form opened the sailors' mouths wider. "Gott sei Dank," said Englehorn, finally coughing up his plug cut, and the measure of his gratitude was indicated by his use of a language he had discarded for English these 20 years. "Jack!" cried Denham. He turned to the sailors with the air of a man who has just scored a personal triumph of the first magnitude. "By God!" he roared. "Didn't I tell you Jack would bring her back if anybody could?" No one disputed that. Eyes popping, tongues loose at both ends, the crew trotted around Driscoll and Anne, pouring out an unintelligible confusion of relief. All save Lumpy. He promptly got back his customary manner, blunt and casual. "Lively!" he snapped. "Some of you muddins take Miss Anne from the mate before he falls in his tracks. Can't you see he's dead beat?" "Give her to me," Denham said. Englehorn pulled out the bottle from which Denham had taken his pick-me-up earlier. It still held something. He went over to Driscoll as Denham turned toward the gate with Anne. The mate took a long swallow and shuddered. "Do you good?" Englehorn murmured. "I got her," Driscoll said hoarsely. "I got her, Skipper." "Good man, Mr. Driscoll." "Good man, my eye," snapped Lumpy. "Great man." Driscoll, helped by the liquor, turned a broad smile in Lumpy's direction and plodded ahead, surrounded by a backslapping ring of sailormen. Anne had been stretched out in the council square upon a hastily built bed of coats and whatnot. Driscoll knelt stiffly and tried to pour the remainder of the bottle's contents down her throat. She swallowed a spoonful, choked, and pushed the bottle away. "Pretty stiff stuff for her," Englehorn murmured. "I don't need anything," Anne gasped, sitting up. "I'm all right." She caught at Driscoll and hid her face against him. "Oh, Jack, we're really back." She began to sob. Now, Englehorn soothed her. "Of course you're back, and we'll have you on the ship in no time." "Cry away, honey," whispered Driscoll. "You've got a cry coming." "It's the first time," he said to the others, "that I've seen even a tear from her." They had all been so absorbed in the miraculous return of Anne and Driscoll that no one had noticed the returning natives, but the whole tribe was filtering back. At first, a single woman had peered from her hut at the reunion out on the plain, and then had slipped out of sight. Other women had followed to stare in unbelief. Then one had gone swiftly to the dark outskirts of the village. And now the men, led by the chief and the witch doctor, were edging slowly into the council square. Some, with newly lighted torches, were climbing to the top of the wall. Englehorn was first to see the pressing black mass, and he whipped about with a sharp command. "Bateau!" he ordered. "Stop!" The sailors were prompt to encircle Anne, but it was immediately plain that the natives meant no trouble. They were simply puzzled, and like their women, unbelieving. They stared at Anne and babbled low and monotonously, "Kong, Kong, 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 Kong." "That," said Denham emphatically, "is just what I want to know too. What about Kong?" "What about him?" Driscoll asked. "I came here to make a moving picture," Denham replied, "but Kong is worth all the movies in the world. Now Jack and Anne are safe. I want that beast." The crew, Englehorn and Driscoll, who was holding Anne in a close embrace, all stared. "What? He's crazy. Don't he know when he's got enough?" "I mean it," Denham insisted. "We've got our bombs. If we capture him alive—" "No," Driscoll burst out. Concealing the portent he had read in the distant crashing sounds which had followed him and Anne on the last stages of their flight, he faced Denham in denial. "Kong is miles away, in his lair, and that's on top of a cliff an army couldn't get at." "Not if he chooses to stay there," Denham agreed. "But will he choose? Why not?" Denham eyed Driscoll meaningly. "Because we've got what Kong wants. You're the man who knows that, Jack, as well as I. Something he'll never get again, Denham. If you're planning to." To use Anne as bait? Denham finished. Not a bit. You know better than that, Jack. But you know too, and so does everybody else, that when I start a thing, I finish it. Well, his gaze circled, challenging one man after another. I've started to get my hands on Kong, and I'm going to see it through. Has seen beauty, so I won't have to use bait. He'll come without any. His instinct, the instinct of the beast, is telling him to stay safe in his mountain. But the memory of beauty is in him. That's stronger than instinct, and he will come. Driscoll stood up with Anne in his arms. I'm taking her back to the ship, he said. High on the wall, in that instant, the murmuring monotone broke into a terrified cry, and the torches swept in broad warning arcs. Kong! Kong! From the dark plain beyond the wall came a deep, swift drumming, and then Kong's thunderous, defiant roar. Anne screamed, and Driscoll held her closer. He's followed her! Close that gate, Denham shouted. Bar it! Inglehorn held Lumpy and several other sailors to form a guard for Anne, but all the rest raced for the gate. 100 suddenly frantic natives followed. The two great doors began to close slowly. But already through the narrowing gap, the torchlight uncovered Kong's racing bulk, and his deep rolling shout aroused a shriller wail of terror upon the wall. The gap at the gate had become scarcely more than a wide crack when Kong's charge struck home. Before it, the crack spread again and Kong's foot squeezed through. As deft as any hand, that closed upon the bottom of one massive door and thrust prodigiously. The mob upon the wall whimpered and panic swept the council square. Driscoll disappeared with Anne behind the first hut. Denham ran up to reinforce the crew at the gate. The gate gave. Inch by stubborn inch, the crack grew wider. Kong shot an arm through, groped, found a sailor, swung the man high above the heads of his comrades, and crushed him to death against the barrier. At that, the natives who had been posing the massive wooden bolts, ready to shove them home when the two doors joined, wailed in defeat and ran. Kong turned himself into a battering ram. Again and again and again, he swung his shoulder against the logs of the barricade. The broad iron hinges began to rip. Under a fresh battering, they tore loose with a harsh rending sound. The massive gate fell inward with a majestic deliberation. The sailors scrambled shrewdly to safety on either side, but a press of natives, fleeing straight to the rear, were crushed wholesale beneath the descending mass. Kong filled the aperture, his body in a crouch, his eyes peering above the little men at his feet to the dark huts. "The bombs!" Denham shouted. From one flank, he gazed unbelievingly at the bulk of the invader and raced back. "The bombs!" Kong lumbered forward to begin a slow, patient search of the dark village. Over the cluster of huts, darkness was now complete, save for such moonlight as filtered through the trees. The last native had thrown away his torch and fled to the deceptive shelter of his home or out into the encircling brush. Kong ripped off the top of one hut after another, stooping down to peer into each. At first, he only rumbled in impatient disappointment, but as he met repeated failure, his tone sharpened to fury. Denham, by a wide swinging run behind concealing huts and trees, finally interposed himself across Kong's line of advance. Gripping a prized bomb in either hand, he kept his distance watchfully. A score of sailors, all armed, now and a few carrying bombs in addition, supported him. Driscoll, with Anne and the small bodyguard, had already hurried through the outskirts of the village and was plunging beneath the far too bright moonlight toward the beach and the boats. "He hasn't seen us yet," Denham told the sailors as Kong halted at another hut. "You men break back to Driscoll. I'll follow. If Kong chases, I'll bomb him, but I'd rather not yet. So many huts might stop the drift of the gas cloud." The men ran, Denham a wary, backward-looking last. Kong shredded another hut, uncovered a cowering family of natives. Insensate massacre followed. Denham paused as the screams reached him, then ran on helplessly. Kong kept up his methodical quest. When he emerged at last from the village, Driscoll had got Anne almost to the boats. The moonlight, however, was so bright that the two were in plain view. Drumming upon his chest, Kong began to run at a sprattling speed, which ate up the intervening distance. Denham called out, and the sailors formed a blocking line between Anne and her monstrous pursuer. Forward of this, Denham took a stand, his hands still holding their bombs. Beside him, Lumpy waited with two more. While Kong was still far away, the first bomb landed squarely on his line of advance. As it broke, a thick vapor rose and enveloped the beast god from head to foot. Denham raced back, turned, and threw again. Kong plunged into and threw a second cloud and a third. By now he was no more than 100 yards from where Driscoll hurried Anne into a boat, but his great speed was gone. His deep challenging cry changed into a strangling cough. His head swung from shoulder to shoulder, and his gait was no more than a staggering walk. "What did I tell you?" Denham cried. Recklessly, the director stepped close enough to break a fourth bomb so squarely against Kong's chest that the liquid in it soaked into the thick hair and evaporated in a cloud which stayed with Kong as he struggled blindly on. One slowly swinging hand of the beast god grazed Denham and knocked him down. Both hands rose toward Anne, now almost within arm's reach. Unable to lift his heavy feet, Kong groped, swung in a wide circle and crashed to the sand. Prone, his body still made a figure of incredible bulk in the moonlight. "Man the boats," Engelhorn ordered. "We'll get out of this." He ran to pick Denham up. "Are you hurt?" "Me? Not a bit. Come on, we've got him." "We'd best get back to the ship, Mr. Denham." "Sure. Send some of the crew. Tell him to fetch anchor chains and tools." "You don't dare." "Why not? He'll be out for hours. Snap into it." "What are you going to do?" "Chain him up and build a raft to float him out to the ship and the steel chamber." "No chain will hold that." Denham squared his shoulders, cocksure and buoyant. "We'll give him more than chains. He's always been king of his world. He's got something to learn, something man can teach any animal. That's fear. That will hold him, if chains alone won't." Bursting with elation, he swung his hand up to Engelhorn's shoulder and shook him impatiently. "Don't you understand? We've got the biggest capture in the world. There's 1 million in it, and I'm going to share with all of you. Listen, a few months from now, it'll be up in lights on Broadway. The spectacle nobody will miss. King Kong, the Eighth Wonder." Chapter 18. The crowd jammed 4 full blocks above Times Square and spilled over into the middle of Broadway. Traffic cops shook, hopeless heads, twiddled helpless fingers, and wearily motioned taxicabs into the side streets above and below. Where the crowd pressed thickest, filling not half but all the street, a sign hung high, announcing to the world in fiery letters, "King Kong, the Eighth Wonder." Beneath the sign, silk hats from Park Avenue jostled derbies from the Bronx. Paris gowns rustled against 3 98-cents pick-me-ups. Sweaters rubbed dinner coats. Slanted caps from 10th Avenue scraped tip brims from Riverside Drive. The social register was there, and as representative a delegation from the underworld as ever, collected anywhere except at police headquarters on a morning after a cleanup. Intense young women from Greenwich Village were there, and their earnest younger sisters from Columbia Heights. There were newsboys, peddlers, traveling salesmen, clerks, cash girls, stenographers, debutantes, matrons, secretaries, and Lilith-eyed maidens with no visible means of support. The whole town was there, waiting for the laggard attention of the ticket taker and meanwhile staring up at King Kong, the Eighth Wonder. "What is it?" asked 10th Avenue from under a tilted cap. "Some kind of a gorilla, they say," replied Park from beneath a silk hat tilted too. "Are you calling names, bright boy?" demanded 10th Avenue, a little doubtfully. "Hana's kid," said a Bronx derby. "It's bigger'n an elephant. That's what I hear straight from a guy who knows the brother of a stagehand right on the inside." "Oh yeah?" said the 398 pick-me-up frock. "Does it do tricks or what?" "My dear," murmured a Paris gown. "What a rabble." "Did you hear that?" hissed a Riverside Drive tip brim. $20 for an orchestra seat, and that dame calls me a rabble." Around back, at the stage entrance, a wise old doorman made way for Anne with an admiring attention he reserved for the best ones. A very different Anne from the Anne of Skull Mountain Island. Anne had a Paris gown, too, of shimmering virginal net. It reached all the way down to her silver-buckled toes. Only her white shoulders and arms were uncovered, these and her shining honey-gold hair. "Let's not go near the stage, Jack," she urged. "I don't like to look at him, even if he is chained. It makes me feel the way I did that awful day on the island." "You oughtn't to be here," Driscoll said moodily. "But Denham insisted, said he needed us both for the publicity." It was a different Driscoll, too, a Driscoll in a dinner jacket and more slender than on board the Wanderer, a smoothly shaved Driscoll, but still holding to the dark, youthful swagger. "I'm glad to be here," Anne insisted. "If it helps, I don't forget all I owe Mr. Denham. Besides, it is helping us, too." Maybe, but somehow I can't quite believe things are going to go quite so smoothly as he believes. Something is going to happen. I've got a hunch. A hunch! Who's got a hunch? Denham swung through the stage door. A very different Denham, indeed. A Denham in tailcoat, silk hat, and impeccable gardenia. A brisk, shrewd Denham intent upon estimating his hard-earned profits. "Hello, Jack," said this Denham. "Hi, Anne. You're just in time, and you both look great. Holy mackerel, Anne. I'm certainly glad we blew ourselves for that outfit of yours." It was terribly expensive. Anne's eyes sparkled as she remembered how delightfully expensive it had been. "We can afford it, sister. $10,000 in the box office. How's that for one night?" Driscoll whistled. "And this is just the starter. Night after night after night. It's going to be just the same, only better." Out at the stage entrance, the wise old doorman was standing up against a dozen odd newcomers, wearing the sort of clothes that newspapermen wear at work, which is the sort of clothes bankers, doctors, store managers, and the better grade of bootleggers wear at work. "Yes," he was agreeing placatingly. "I know you all, gentlemen. The Sun, the Herald Tribune, the Times, the World Telly. But how can I let you in? Especially when you've brought along a lot of hell-charging photographers. Mr. Denham hasn't given me any orders." "Let 'em in, Joe," Denham called. "The newspaper crowd," he explained to Anne and Driscoll. "Here for interviews with you two. And maybe I wasn't smart to break the interviews right with the opening of the show and get twice the splash." "Have you ever been interviewed, honey?" Driscoll asked, hot and red. "Just for a job," Anne murmured. "But this can't be worse." "Miss Darrow, gentlemen," Denham said, waving an introductory hand, "and Mr. Driscoll, the Wanderer's heroic mate." "Boy, oh boy," hissed a photographer. "What a break the mate got when he rescued her." "I hear you had a peck of trouble, Mr. Driscoll," the Times man said. "Don't make any mistake about that," Anne interposed. "He was all alone when he did it. All the sailors with him had been killed." "I didn't do much," Driscoll insisted, running a finger around a suddenly tight collar. "Denham's the one who got Kong. The rest of us were going backward fast, but Denham had the nerve to stand and chuck bombs." "Don't drag me into this," Denham protested shrewdly. "Miss Darrow's the real story. If it hadn't been for her, we'd never have got near Kong. He came back to the village to get her." "Beauty," exclaimed an inspired tabloid reporter. "Beauty and the Beast. Boy, what a headline. I'll cut me a slice of bonus for that one. Beauty and the Beast." Denham repeated admiringly and winked with satisfaction at Anne and Driscoll. "Exactly. That's your story." "What we came up for," said a photographer impatiently, "is pictures." "In just a little while," Denham promised. "I'm going to let you take some pictures right on the stage, after the curtain goes up and the audience can watch. The first pictures, gentlemen, ever taken of Kong for publication anywhere in the civilized world. And you may snap Miss Darrow and Driscoll standing right alongside." "Ha-cha," said a cameraman through his nose. "This is going to be good." "So far, yeah," said another. "But how'll it be if this guy Lyons of the Sun pulls his usual stunt of crowding his camera in front of the rest of us?" "Who? Me?" cried the man called Lyons. "Why, I'm practically figuring on Frenching this job. You don't have to worry about me. My boss Bartnett wouldn't do much with a picture like this." "Not much more than 4 columns," agreed the tabloid photographer. "Tell me this," the Sun's skeptical reporter interposed. "Are you sure that you've got your 20-foot ape tied up good and tight?" He spoke with a Missouri drawl and teetered on his toes with the light stance of a good squash player. "I ask," he added, "because I'm wearing my best suit and I don't want to have it torn." Denham's laughter rang with solid reassurance. "Take a look for yourself." He motioned them to the wings of the darkened stage. Kong was there, a king no longer. He crouched in a great steel cage under a weight of tangled chains. Chains led from his hunkering body to ring bolts in the thick steel floor. Chains held his great paws immovable and bound his broad black feet. Only his head was free. That swung mutely upon his audience. As Denham quickly explained, he had not used his throat for any speaking purpose for days, and his hands were too tightly bound to drum now upon his chest. "Just the same," said the Sun skeptic, "if you don't mind, I'll let the more eager news-gatherers go first." "Anne," Denham beckoned, "and you too, Jack. I want you both out on the stage when the curtain goes up." "Oh, no." Anne shrank back, her face as white as her gown. Come along, sister, Denham urged genially. It's all right, we've knocked a lot more of the fight out of Kong since you saw him last. He's harmless. Reluctantly, Anne joined Driscoll at the edge of the stage. Kong swung his vast head toward her. The photographers began arranging their cameras and electric flashlights. If I can catch that honey girl right up alongside the ape, said a tabloid photographer, the paper'll spread it all over P1. I hope the ape is really tied tight, said the Times reporter. Oh, sure. This Denham's taking no chances, not with a gold mine like he's got. Denham patted Anne's arm reassuringly. It won't be long, he said. I'm going out to make a little speech. Then the curtain'll go up. You two will pose. And after that, just as soon as you've told the newspapermen a little more, you can go back to your hotel. Anne was thankful her hotel was 9 blocks away. When Driscoll engaged a room in one just across the street from the theater, she had marveled at his recklessness. Denham edged out past the curtain with a cheerful flip of one hand. From there, his voice came back to the group on the shadowed stage. The reporters and cameramen waited with the scant patience of those to whom speeches are no treat. Anne drew close to Driscoll and sighed gratefully when he put an encouraging arm about her waist. Kong's deep-set eyes watched the arm, and his chains rattled faintly. Ladies and gentlemen, came Denham's voice, I am here tonight to tell you a strange story. So strange a story that no one will believe it. But, ladies and gentlemen, seeing is believing. And we, I and my associates, have brought for your eyes the living proof of our adventure, an adventure in which 12 of our party met terrible deaths. The Sun skeptic nudged the reporter from the Times. That 12 isn't any Tammany count either, he said. It's the real thing. McLean, who covers ship news for us, slipped onto Denham's boat disguised as a columnist and got the same count from an old sailor granddad, an A.B. named Lumpy. My paper said only 9 were killed, the Times man disagreed. The other 3 weren't fit to print, the Sun skeptic explained cheerfully. But before I tell you any more, ladies and gentlemen, Denham's voice went on outside the curtain, I am going to let you look for yourselves. I am going to show you the greatest sight your eyes ever beheld. One who was king and the god of the world he knew, but who now comes to civilization as a captive, as an exhibit to gratify mankind's insatiable curiosity. Ladies and gentlemen, look upon Kong, the 8th wonder of the world. The curtain rose and the audience surged to its feet as one. Murmurs, gasps, frightened, stifled cries ran through the theater. Denham smiled the showman's smile of triumph. On the stage, Kong's head swayed and his chains began a faint but continued jingling, as though he were trembling. And now, said Denham reaching into the wings for Anne, let me introduce Miss Anne Darrow, the pluckiest girl I've ever known. Here, he went on as the audience settled back to applaud, is beauty. There is the beast. Miss Darrow, ladies and gentlemen, has lived through an experience no other woman ever dreamed of, about which I shall tell you later. She was rescued from the very grasp of Kong by the Wanderer's brave mate, Mr. John Driscoll. Driscoll, red and reluctant, stood beside Anne, and the audience, conscious that they were gazing upon romance, murmured approval of the slim, bright-haired girl and her boyish, swaggering partner. Lastly, Denham went on, before I tell you the full story of our adventure, the newspaper photographers are coming on the stage, and you, the first audience to look upon Kong, will have the privilege of seeing taken the first pictures of Kong since his capture. Kong's chains continued that faint jingling as the cameramen tramped nonchalantly out before the footlights. The man called Lion slid nimbly into a position which the tabloid reporters eyed resentfully. Denham drew Anne close to the cage. She pleaded silently, but tried to hide her fear when he shook his head warningly. The photographers, in a whispering chorus, urged her to smile, and she did her best. The flashes exploded dully inside the electric light globes, and the stage was filled with a blinding glare. Kong curled his mobile lips back from long white teeth, and then, unexpectedly, he roared. For the first time in days, he found his voice. As his rolling thunder re-echoed deafeningly from the ceiling and the audience started up, Driscoll's mouth tightened apprehensively. Anne stifled a cry and drew back a step so that the mate was between her and the cage. Denham, however, laughed loudly in reassurance. "Don't be alarmed, ladies and gentlemen," he cried. "Kong's chains are of chrome steel. He'll stay where he is." The thunder of Kong's voice fell to a distant muttering, but his chains now were jingling more loudly. "Stand close again, Miss Darrow," the cameramen urged. The blinding glare once more filled the stage. Anne shrank away, covering her face with her hands. Driscoll looked impatiently toward Denham. "It'll be all right now, Anne," he said. "I guess we're through." "Wait," Denham ordered. "One more, together." The white glare flashed across the stage a third time. Kong opened his mouth and roared from deep in his chest. As Driscoll swung an arm protectingly around Anne, the captive beast god struggled furiously. His rage was a wild and cataclysmic emotion which surged from his inmost being. "Holy mackerel," Denham whispered. "He thinks you're attacking her, Jack. Hold it, hold it!" And he motioned excitedly to the photographers. Kong stood up. The great body, which had been held by chains to a crouch, was suddenly and terribly erect. Kong's head struck the top of the cage and tore it loose. His hands, dangling broken bits of chain, began to drum upon his broad chest. One enormous foot, rattling both chain and ring bolt, which an instant before had held it to the floor, pried at the scarcely resisting bars which separated him from Anne. Panic threw the audience into a shouting, screaming tangle. By scores and hundreds, they clawed one another, seeking passage to the exits. Driscoll swung Anne into his arms, and Dow broke through the startled newspapermen toward the stage door. Behind him, the steel bars snapped and Kong's roar shook the theater's walls. "My hotel!" Driscoll cried into Anne's ear. "Just across the street." "Let me down," Anne gasped. "We'll go faster if I run." They raced along the narrow alley which led from the stage entrance and got to the sidewalk. Across the street, at the revolving door of the hotel, Driscoll glanced back. Kong was just bursting out of the stage entrance. "Elevator!" Driscoll cried, and raced Anne inside. As they drew breath behind the closing elevator door, Kong crashed into the hotel lobby. A hotel detective emptied a revolver into the monstrous intruder and looked incredulously at his weapon when Kong swung around in undiminished strength and crashed back to the street. Chapter 19. Behind the locked door of Driscoll's room, Anne sank upon the bed. "I can't stand it, Jack. I can't. It's like a horrible dream, like being back there on the island. We're safe here. I won't leave you, honey. They'll get him. It's going to be all right." Driscoll knelt down, and when she cried with thick, racking sobs, he pretended to laugh at her. "You mustn't begin to cry when the trouble's all over." Anne wiped her eyes with a slow, woebegone hand. Driscoll, laughing still, leaned toward the nearest wall and motioned Anne to follow. Here's something to make you smile. Listen to what's going through the telephone in the next room." Drawing her close to the locked intervening door, he made her attend to a shrill nightclub soprano voice on the other side. "Yeah, Jimmy, it's Mabel. You bet I'm glad you're back. Talk louder, Jimmy. There's fire engines going by. Sure, I saved the evening. 10 o'clock'll be swell." "We oughtn't to be eavesdropping like this," Anne demurred. "Shucks," said Driscoll. "If it cheers you up, why not? And say, Jimmy, wait till you see me in my new outfit. It's a wow, kid. All right, sure, I'll be there. Say, when did I ever break a date with you, Jimmy boy?" "Absolutely, with bells." "Ah!" Driscoll's subdued mirth vanished as the monologue ended in a high, strangled scream. "Oh my God, Jimmy, Jimmy!" Driscoll leaped from his knees for the door. He had got it only half unlocked when Kong's black arm thrust through the window. At Anne's cry, Driscoll turned and seized a chair. Kong knocked him senseless against a wall with a wide, sweeping movement, jerked the bed to the window, and lifted Anne through. Cradling her in one arm with that curious care which had marked the previous capture, the beast god leaped from the side of the hotel wall to the top of the adjoining building. Driscoll staggered to the window just in time to see the huge dark shape swing out of sight across the rooftops. "Denham!" he shouted senselessly. "Denham! Where are you? Can't you stop?" He ran back to the door and blundered down the corridor to an elevator. In the streets below, New York was mobilizing for a fantastic, grim pursuit. From a score of waiting posts, police radio cars raced toward the hotel, their sirens screaming for clear traffic lanes. 100 police nightsticks wrapped the pavements and aroused 100 more. Far south on Center Street, a dozen motorcycle cops, with Tommy guns, careened out of headquarters, and in their wake rolled the multiple-cylindered automobiles of the department's highest. How did that brute ever break loose? Those chains should have held an army tank. Get some fire trucks. This is going to be a ladder job. Clear the streets. Get everybody off. Everybody. Driscoll thrust the elevator operator aside and got out of doors just as Denham, surrounded by policemen, came breathlessly around a corner of the hotel. He went up the side of the hotel, officer. Don't shake your head, you damned fool. He did. That beast can climb smooth marble. Denham! Driscoll cried. He got her. Denham stopped short and, raising clenched fists, shook them above a torrent of profanity. One of the policemen hiked up his coattail and hauled out a revolver. The police radio cars streamed in, 6 at a clip through the cleared lanes. Look! The packed throng in front of the hotel spoke with a prolonged single voice. 2 blocks down the avenue, Kong appeared momentarily on a rooftop, in the glare of an electric sign. Anne was a small white patch in the crook of his left arm. The policeman fired uselessly as the beast god swarmed up the side of a higher building and disappeared. Everybody pile on this fire truck, shouted a sergeant, and then to the driver he commanded, On your way, Waterboy. Driscoll was aboard, and Denham too, as the truck whirled in pursuit. Keep going, the sergeant ordered. He was going east towards 6th Avenue. Go a block past where we saw him and stop. Kong was nowhere in sight when the riders leaped down to look, but a taxi driver ran across the almost empty street under the dark elevated structure and waved still farther east. It jumped, he screamed, still refusing to believe his own eyes. It jumped, from that building there to the L tracks, and from the tracks to the building on the other side. Scatter, shouted the sergeant. Circle the whole block. Far to the east, crossing Madison, were yellow headlights in front of screaming sirens. The quick-witted fire truck driver sounded his own signal, and the yellow headlights raced forward and stopped. A stuttering string of motorcycles followed, and close behind the police commissioner and a carful of his inspectors. Will machine gun bullets kill that brute of yours, Denham? Enough will, I guess. Is he cornered? We lost him right here, sir, the sergeant said. From the distant eastern side of the block came the sound of shots. I circled some men around there, Mr. Commissioner, the sergeant cried. After him! The cars swung into 6th Avenue, tore down the block, whirled east against the one-way traffic signs, and slid to a stop on screeching brakes. The motorcycles swung in front, on either flank, and in the rear like torpedo boat destroyers around a battleship. Last came the rumbling truck. At the corner of 5th Avenue, a shaking policeman pointed south, but in that direction Kong was not to be seen. If only we knew of a place he might be heading for, the commissioner cried. I can make a guess, Driscoll said ruggedly. It'll be someplace high up. Kong is used to mountains. He lived in one. The higher he is, the safer he believes he is from his enemies. If there's any building in this district that towers over everything else, that's the building we'll find him on the very top of it. So that, said the commissioner slowly, is why they ran the Empire State Building up 1,000 feet and more. Rot, said the blunt chief inspector. Driscoll's right, Denham interposed. That's our best bet. I guess it's our only one, the commissioner amended. Let's go. By now a dozen reporters had gathered, and a crowd which packed the street. The commissioner shouldered through these to his car, Denham and Driscoll following his beckoning hand. There, down there, the great host gave tongue. Kong appeared for the 3rd time since he had made his capture. Again he was far down the street. Again he crouched a brief instant on the roof of a building, and again disappeared. Let her out, said the commissioner, and his car swept away to where the square tower of the Empire State lifted its crown up through an encircling veil of white light. They reached the building's corner just in time to witness a scene which no one of them believed, even though he sat watching. From a roof on the upper side of the street, Kong leaped. His black, monstrous body curved in a long arc, clear across the roadway to the lowest section of the skyscraping structure opposite. And then he pulled himself, from window ledge to window ledge up the first setback, and disappeared. By the time Driscoll, Denham, and the commissioner had leaped out, the beast god was swarming up the next setback. Don't shoot, said the commissioner. He's still got the girl. There was no mistaking that. Anne rested in the arm Kong did not use for climbing. Send some of those Tommy guns up the elevators, the commissioner ordered. He'll never climb to the top. We'll maybe catch him on the roof of one setback or another." Driscoll struck down the commissioner's pointing arm. "You'll never catch King Kong on any roof," he cried furiously. "He's going to the top of the mountain, I tell you." "Easy, Jack," Denham said. "It's true. Look, there he goes up again." Kong was so high now that his figure seemed smaller than that of a man, and still he climbed. A black silhouette against the chalky walls, he drew himself from ledge to ledge until he rose into the bright floodlights which swept around the crest of the building, and still he crawled. "That means the end of the girl," the police sergeant said. "If we shoot him up there, she's gone." "Wait a minute," Driscoll cried. "There's one thing we haven't tried." The commissioner looked at him. "The Army planes," Driscoll explained, "from Roosevelt Field. They might find a way to finish Kong off and leave Anne untouched." "It's a chance," said the commissioner. "Call the field, Mr. O'Brien. Burn up the wires." "I'm going up into the building," Driscoll announced, loosening his collar. "I'll take a try at Kong's mountain myself." "I'll go along, Jack," Denham offered. The commissioner motioned to half a dozen police officers armed with submachine guns, and they followed. "Let me take one of those things," Driscoll demanded when they were inside the cool corridor of the building. The policeman caught a nod from his sergeant and handed the piece over. "I can use it," Driscoll assured him. "Denham, tell him how good I am." "The boy's good," Denham said. "Plenty good," he added hoarsely. There was a fair delay after they got to the last elevator level. The keys to the door which led to the observation platform were missing, and the custodian had to be found. "Listen," Driscoll whispered. From far off they heard the drone of a plane, of a squadron of planes. "The good old Army," Denham said, trying to laugh. The planes came into sight, tipped with green and red lights, 6 of them, high in the air. They were far higher than the top of the skyscraper. They were so high that their red and green lights almost merged. One after another, they hurtled down beneath the stars. Kong roared overhead, and the drum note of his fists rose to a wild tattoo. "We can see from here," Driscoll said, and led the way through a window to the farthest corner of the small roof, which belonged to this topmost setback. Above them, on the ledge of the observation platform, Kong roared his challenge as the zooming ships swept down. Anne, in her shimmering white dress, lay between his solidly planted feet. The second plane had cut in close, obviously meaning to brush Kong with a wingtip. As the plane curved, its wing missed. It was Kong who struck the blow. His great paw swung out and struck. He staggered, but the plane, torn out of its path in the air, crashed down, bounded from the wall, and then spun out and down to the distant street. Halfway in its flight, it burst into flames, and this illumined infinitesimal figures which swarmed around as the wreck struck. "They're coming back," Denham said. "The whole 5 are circling back." "And this time," Driscoll prophesied, "they'll shoot. There's room. When Kong rises to challenge and beat his breast, Anne is so far below they can jump at his chest and not risk hitting her." "About all we can do is pray, I guess," said the sergeant. "You can pray if you like," Driscoll told him. "But I'm going out. I can wait behind the door that goes out onto the platform. When Kong gets his, I want to be close." Denham said nothing, but he followed, and so, after a short uncertainty, did the policeman. By the time Driscoll got to the door, the planes were zooming back, and Kong was giving them his whole infuriated attention. His great feet gripping the parapet, he flung his roaring defiance to the night wind. High up among the stars, the red and green lights of the leading plane twinkled, then suddenly rushed downward. Kong pounded his chest, stretched to his highest stature. Driscoll unlocked the door, opened it a crack, and waited. The plane came down in a long, swift slide. For a split second it seemed to poise like a giant hummingbird in front of its beast adversary. Then it curved upward and was away. But in the instant of pause, its machine gun had poured lead into Kong's breast. Driscoll, watching, could have sworn he saw the bullets jerk Kong's coarse hair as they plunged into his heart. Kong staggered, and one lifted foot, brushing Anne, rolled her off the parapet back onto the roof space. Kong turned slowly, as though he meant to pick her up. His lifted foot settled back. He stooped, staring down at Anne with a puzzled, hurt look. He began to cough. From high in the night, the other planes swooped down. Kong's challenge broke upon a harsh, rending cough, but he straightened to his greatest height, and his drumming tattoo was as loud as ever. One after another, the planes slid down, poised each for its successive murderous instant, and then curved away. The rattle of the successive machine guns grew louder over Kong's tattooing. He swayed, and in spite of his gripping feet, began to topple. He fought to the end. With his last strength, he leaped for the rearmost plane as it curved away. He missed, but his mighty spring carried him clear of the setbacks below and out above the street. For a breath then, high above the civilization which had destroyed him, he hung in the same regal loneliness that had been his upon Skull Mountain Island. Then he plunged down in wreckage at the feet of his conquerors. Driscoll swept Anne into his arms. Anne, you're all right!" Anne lay against his breast crying in soft thankfulness. Denham and the sergeant leaned over the parapet. "Well," said the policeman, "that was a sight. I never thought the aviators get him." "The aviators didn't get him," Denham replied slowly. "What?" "It was beauty. As always, beauty killed the beast." The sergeant's puzzled frown grew deeper. King Kong, by Edgar Wallace and Marion C. Cooper. Novelization by Delos W. Lovelace.